In this video, I'll just be going over how to add an underwater caustic image sequence within Maya using Arnold. Now, I have gone over something similar within another video where I used Nuke to create the image sequence. So if you haven't seen that video or don't know how to create a caustic image sequence, I would recommend checking that out first so that you can follow along. If you have seen that video, well then by all means you can continue forward to the upcoming chapters. But with that said, let's get into it. Alright, here we are in Maya. As you can see, I've created this scene just as a starting point. I didn't want this video to be focused around the caustics themselves, so if you'd like to jump ahead to that chapter, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to quickly go over this scene setup so you have a better idea of how I went about achieving this final result here. So first of all, I'm just going to click on the render settings button up here. Inside the Arnold Renderer tab and down in the environment dropdown, you'll see I've created this AI atmosphere volume and it's plugged into the atmosphere. To create that, you just click on this checker box and then select Create AI Atmosphere Volume right there. Now if we go into the settings for it, you'll see I've set the density to 0.1. Now I'm just going to close the render settings and go into rendered mode within my viewport over here within my perspective view. And you'll see that it is doing quite a bit. We're getting quite a bit of volumetrics coming from those two light sources within my scene. If I just change that to 0, you'll see it goes away entirely. So it is doing quite a bit for us here. So next I'm going to just turn that off and we'll go over to our camera. So you'll see I've just created this camera within the scene, moved it up over there, it's rotated down, just moved it into place, rotated it into place, and then the focal length is set to 35 millimeters, the default. So pretty straightforward on that one. Next, going to the ground plane. That's just a basic piece of geometry. It's just a plane scaled up. I removed the subdivisions on it by going to the channel box after creating it. So if we just go hold spacebar, create, polygon primitives, plane, I'm going to move it up so we can see it. I'm going to hit R to go into scale, scale it up. That's what I did there. And then I go to the channel box and I just went to these guys and changed them to 1. And then I just applied an Arnold material since we are using Arnold to render. So I just hold right click on that plane and then go assign new material, and then go to Arnold Shader Surface AI Standard Surface, and that will apply a Arnold material to your object. But so if we just click on that guy again, you'll see that I also, on the back end of it, just extruded it out after scaling it up a few times, and that's just to create that progressional curve going back. But if we go over to that material, let's go to the attribute editor. We can just click on this or go Control A. And then I'm going to right click on this arrow, go to the ground matte. I'm going to double click on this color box. You'll see that I've just assigned it this desaturated warm kind of color, just to be indicative of a kind of ocean floor as if it were sand. It's a very kind of light colored sand, albeit, but you do kind of see that little bit of warmth there. So that's kind of what I was going for on that. And then the roughness is at 0.56. That's just so that we don't see any kind of sharp reflections coming off of that spotlight being used for the caustics, which I will go over in a minute. And then if we go to the sphere, you'll see that is just a very basic piece of geometry. It's just a create polygon primitives sphere, one of these guys. I just moved it up, hit 3 on it to make sure it was smoothed out, and then moved it into place so that it was centered within my frame, within my camera's perspective. And then for the material, I just applied an Arnold material to it again. And that is just set to 1 for the metalness. And then the roughness is set to 0.36. So the reflections aren't super sharp. They're also not super rough and blurred out. Kind of in the middle. And that's just preference. You can feel free to set that to whatever you'd like to get sharper reflections or make it even rougher if you'd like. That's totally up to you. And then if we go down to the top light, you'll see that's just a scaled up area light. And that is an Arnold area light. So to create that, you would just go to the Arnold shelf and then click on this guy over here. And that'll create an area light. You just move it up, go R to scale it. And then you can hit E to rotate it. Click and hold on that ring, and then that'll rotate it around. And then you can just scale it out again, scale it that way. Now we can go to the channel box to refine that adjustment a little more in the rotation. We can go -90 even. There we go. And then I just kind of nudged it into place until I kind of liked how it was looking. And that's how I got the position and rotation down for this guy. Now if we go to the attribute editor, you'll see the color is just this kind of saturated blue color, not too saturated, somewhere in the middle. And that's the kind of color value for it there. And then the intensity is 1 and the exposure is 9. So that's just providing this. This is that here actually. So this is just the top light as well as the ground and the sphere active right here. The caustic light was hidden. And so as you can see, that's just providing this very soft, diffused top-down lighting, creating this kind of like ambient influence and that initial kind of underwater feel within our scene. But now I'm going to go into the caustic light itself. So looking at that, I'm just going to click on it and then go Shift H to show it. And then you'll see that it is a spotlight. It's a Maya spotlight. So I just moved it up into place, positioned it over my sphere at a slight angle there. And then to adjust this light, it is a Maya spotlight. So you don't go to the Arnold shelf to create it. You go to the Create menu up here, Lights, and there it is there. Or again, alternatively, you can use the hotbox menu by holding spacebar, which is my preferred method because I believe it's faster. And then you go Lights, Spotlight. So now I can just quickly kind of try to recreate what I've done here just to take you through it step by step. So you just create that spotlight, you can move it up. And then what we can do from here is turn on the Use All Lights mode within the viewport so we can get an initial feel for the effect that it's having within our scene and determine an initial kind of orientation of the light as well. And then we can just push it over here. We can use this guy for reference. So we can just copy that cone angle value. And then I'm going to click on that light, paste it in there for that cone angle. And then the penumbra was at 15. So I'll just paste that in there. The height is about relatively the same. Move it up a little more maybe. And that should be good. So you will notice that for these Maya lights, you do have to adjust the attributes for these lights in 2 places. So within the default kind of light settings drop down here. So for the spotlight, it would be under the spotlight attributes drop down. And then you also have to adjust these settings under this Arnold drop down, which is kind of hidden if you're not aware of it. So that is where you go to adjust the rest of the settings. So what we'll do here is check out that exposure for this light. It's at 8.5. So if we change that to 8.5 as well, that should give us our exposure value. And so then from here, we're going to want to go back into that rendered mode within the viewport because we are going to be using Arnold settings from here on out and a light filter within Arnold, and that won't display within the viewport if we try to add it and then get that visual feedback within here. So we got to go into rendered mode to actually see that effect come across like so here. And so also, if I just set this to 0, you'll see that we're also not getting much of an effect here because we're using that Arnold exposure. So I'm just going to bump that back up to 8.5. And now we're seeing that come across. I think we might have actually, do we see that effect in the viewport? No, we don't. Yeah, see, it's because it's an Arnold value. So you do need to go into the Arnold render mode to actually see that exposure adjustment come across. But now I'm going to go into the light filters and I'm going to go Add, Gobo, Add. And that will create a Gobo light filter for us and attach it to the light. We actually saw that node pop up over here and the Gobo light filter connected to the light within the hypershade as well. So now I'm just going to go back to the default mode within the perspective view here. Turn off rendered mode. I'm going to click on my light and I'm going to click on this input and output connections button and that'll isolate our light so it's less cluttered within the hypershade. And now to access the settings for the Gobo, we can either double click on this guy here within the hypershade where it's made that connection, or we can go up to the tab that you'll see a pop up over at the top of the attribute editor and that will also get us to that same place right there. All right, so now to actually have our caustics come through and be projected through our light source through that Gobo, we're going to have to import that caustic image sequence into the slide map here. So if we just click on that checkered box and then click on File and then click on the File tab, we're going to go click on this folder here and then we can just go navigate to that Underwater Caustic Image Sequence that we would have exported out of Nuke. Again, I went through that in another video, so if you haven't seen that, I would definitely recommend going over and checking that out. The link is in the description, and then you can come back here and follow along. If you've already seen that, or you already know how to do it and have a kind of caustic image sequence at the ready, you can just navigate to that directory and bring it in here. So I'm just going to do that now. All right, so I've navigated to the directory that I've created for that caustic image sequence. You can see it here with all the frames rendered out of Nuke. And I've made a separate directory just for this project. And then you just can select that first image within your image sequence and then hit open and it'll just bring it in there. And then what we'll also want to do is make sure we tick off use image sequence. And that'll ensure that the entire image sequence within your directory is being used across the timeline. Otherwise, it would just be a static caustic image within your Gobo, and that would not look good. We want the full animation, obviously, to come through. So you do that by just clicking that box there. All right, now let's go over into the top left corner of my workspace, where again, you can see I have the Arnold render view. If we click on the second snapshot, that's what the scene looks like here now with that caustic light on. So this is just, again, that, we'll just hide this to prevent confusion. This is just the, also hide this. This is just the top light with the ground sphere and that atmosphere in effect. And then this is all of that with that caustic light right here turned on, and that's what that looks like. So looking pretty good. And that is how you create a caustic light within Maya using Arnold. So hope you got something of value out of this. If you did, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe as well. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on to a few more tips here, because as you'll see, obviously I did get a bit of a different final look than what you see here. So I'm just going to go through how I got that. And so if you'd like to stick around for that, feel free. It'll just be like a minute or so. So jumping into the first snapshot, you'll see that I have this bloom effect. And I'm doing that using the lens effect imager within Arnold. So, and that is this guy here. So if you just bring out your settings, you'll see within the post tab, you have this add imager option. And so if you click on it, you get various imagers that you can select from. And so I've added a few of these to my renders to create these different results. And so the first one is this lens effect imager. And so with that on, this is the effect that I'm getting there. And that is just the bloom. I've just adjusted that. I've pushed the strength up a bit, pushed the radius up a bit, and adjusted the threshold as well. And then this one here, that's just increasing the contrast, and that is just with the color curves. So that's what that looks like with this on. And so if we click this arrow here, you can have a little better control over it because it brings it out into this separate window. And I've just tried to do a very subtle kind of S-curve, if you will. Not quite an S-curve, but it's getting there. But I've just dragged down those shadows a little bit on the bottom end of it and then brought it up on the very bottom end. And then I've just kind of clamped down those highlights on the top end just a bit. And that's what the color curves is doing. And then if we go into the next snapshot, this is the white balance. And so that's just adding a bit of a blue push overall into the frame. And then on the next one, that's just an exposure imager. And so that's obviously just increasing the exposure overall of the image. And that is that. And then on this one, if we click on the light, go into the that Gobo tab, and then if we click on the slide map, go into the Place 2D texture node. I created this kind of warped effect, this kind of distortion within the caustics, just by giving it a little bit of noise, this noise UV. I just added a small value of 0.03 to that caustic image sequence. And that created this slight bit of distortion within the caustics. You can also get a similar effect as well by further customizing it and adding a value within this input box as well. So that is totally preference. It doesn't need it necessarily, depends on the look you're going for, but that is another way just to kind of further customize those caustics here within Maya and Arnold. So yeah, there's just some bonus tips to show you how I went from this to this just within Arnold. Now I would usually achieve this kind of look or try to within comp using either Nuke or Blender, but I wanted to keep this video as simple as possible. So I thought I would just kind of do some extra post work just within the Arnold render view here instead. But anyways, that is the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.